Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're gonna just wait for a few minutes.
Hello.
To let everyone come in, and then we can start. So, as usual, because I'm on full screen, I don't see anything that's happening in the Teams version. There you are. Okay, so same as usual for people who attend these webinars quite often, feel free to leave your camera on because it's always more pleasant for us to see faces than just letters in little circles. So your mics should be turned off as a default setting, but if during the webinar you want to ask a question, maybe you can raise your hand and you can unmute your mic and then no problem. If also you have any questions, you might want to use the conversation feature so that we can see them, and I will interrupt Isabelle to ask the questions. So let's just get started. So welcome to our March webinar with a very wide subject about what do they really want to know when we're talking about international accreditations, because they all seem to cover the same subjects, basically, but they all have different expectations. So before we start, a quick introduction to present HEADway Advisory for those of you who don't know who we are. So HEADway Advisory is a consulting firm specialized in higher education. And we have 4 main activities. The main one I would say is strategy, anything organizational, institutional. HEADway People is dedicated to headhunting services for executive positions. Quality and accreditation is the department that I run, dedicated to, guess what, quality and accreditation. Well, we help schools with all these subjects. And the last one is information and data. We publish white papers, newsletters, and so on. So today it is my great pleasure to welcome Isabelle Fagnot, who's Associate Dean. And actually, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. That's much better.
Okay. Thank you, Mélanie. So hello, everyone. Welcome to the session. I'm Isabelle Fagnot. I'm Associate Dean, Quality and Accreditations at KEDGE Business School. I'm also Professor of Information Systems. I have been working in accreditation, I don't even dare say, but since 2011. I've held a number of positions in different business schools in France, and I'm happy to be here today and discuss with you the different accreditations and what they are expecting. And as we know, it can change in pretty quickly.
Yes. So
as well,
if you have any current subjects dealing with these questions about, okay, we're getting started on that accreditation, or maybe there are new standards that we haven't gone through up until now, and we're not sure about how to approach one given, topic of an accreditation. So please be free to ask in the conversation or interrupt, raise your hands, and we'll discuss your specific case if we can. So I would say that as a starter, the main thing that you really need is to know your audience, right? So Isabelle, what is the best way to know your audience when we're talking about international accreditations?
So thank you for pointing this out, because I think, like anything that you write, that you work with, you have to think about what the audience is expecting. So it may sound basic, but sometimes we forget about that because we want to report on something, but we don't really think about exactly who we are going to be sending the document to. So we really have to think about the audience, what they want in the standard, but also what they are kind of expecting in those standards. Because that if you just put like a list of things that you do, it's not going to be sufficient. You have to think about how you're going to tell your story as a school to that specific audience. So if you think of AACSB, AACSB has a big thing on, of course, we have the basics on strategic management, learner success, and thought leadership. But, we know they're also very interested in societal impact. We've recently had, new guidelines on that because of what's happening in the world, actually, and in the US in particular. And then we know that there's also faculty qualifications and assurance of learning that's very important. Now, if you are, oh, sorry, go ahead, Mélanie.
No, I was going to say that the most basic thing is read the documentation. Because I've seen a lot of schools who just read the titles, the headlines, and don't go deep into the standards, the explanations. The AACSB does this guidance for documentation. EFMD has the annexes to the process manual. I mean, it's not a fun read. We all agree on that, but you really need to read them to understand, if you want to understand what's happening there.
Yes, exactly. So, and also what it's good to do when you start writing your documents, it's good to go exactly as Mélanie said, go, read the documentation, answer what they're asking in the documentation, and then you'll have to do another, run on the document where you're going to really see how you're going to tell your story with all those elements. And also sometimes, within page constraints, because we know that depending on the accreditation and whether it's initial or renewal, you have different page constraints as well. So you really have to know about that, because sometimes it's easier to write 150 pages than it is to write 50 pages. So you have to really think, and if you have 50 pages, what do you want to come across? So really know what they're expecting on this. And if we take one example, and it's the, if we think of AACSB and societal impact, and we think about when they first came out with that new standard, schools started listing what all the initiatives that they were doing. Then it was clearly not the way to go around it, but it was more to say, well, we are mission driven. Based on our mission, those are the axes that are important to us, and this is the story you want to tell about your school. Well, now, they are giving you more freedom to do that, even more, freedom on how you're going to determine what societal impact means for your school. It's not as prescriptive, but you really have to think, so maybe you can start with a list, but then you have to think about, well, if they want to know my impact, and they are interested in mission-driven, and if it's mission-driven, I should say it this way, it's mission-driven, they want to know about impact, how do you say that? But unless you realize that they are mission-driven, you're not going to write the best piece if you don't realize that and you don't know that audience. So that's the, one thing with AACSB, with EQUIS, it's, you are the same school, you have the same mission, but then how do you tell your story to EQUIS, for instance? So, whether it's, and we'll talk a little bit, about EFMD accredited as well, but EQUIS, is focused on, of course, context and strategy, for sure, but you have 3 main chapters that are also 3 transversal topics that you need to address in each, in each chapter. So we talk about internationalization, we talk about, connections with practice, and also everything that's linked to ethics, responsibility, and sustainability. So again, you are the same school. You have the same, material to work with. Then how do you tell your story? So that those 3 chapters, besides all of the other things that they're asking, are really key to every aspect of your school. So yes, it's also based on strategy, your strategic plan, your mission, but then you have those three areas of focus. So you have to really know that so that you can, yet again, tell your story in a different light.
It reminds me of that, I think it's like an Indian tale about the elephant. Three people touching an elephant from a different side, all think it's something different. And basically, your school is the elephant. And you might want someone to think, yeah, it's a stone wall, which I think was one of the images. But you might want the other one to think that it's the tube or whatever. So and I think I will come back to this many times during the webinar about really reading the standards and understanding the standards. And if you don't understand something in the standards, if something is not clear, and I think AACSB has done a great job simplifying the standards compared to the previous versions of the standards, ask someone. There are other schools that will be accredited schools that will be more than happy to explain things to you. If you're not in the process yet, you might not have a mentor, but if you do have a mentor, turn to the mentor, confirm with others, because everybody has a perception of things. So it's very important that you have a clear image before starting, because as Isabelle said, you're the same school, but you cannot say exactly the same things because they don't want to know exactly the same things. And that's the whole point of that conversation.
It's even, I think, trickier, and we'll go into the more programs accredited, the accreditations, or the accreditation that are more towards programs. If you have if you manage a program, well, you have to, know the international accreditations, but what they expect from the, 1 to 3 different accreditations. If you are, because I see, a number of French schools in the webinar today. If you are a French school, or depending on where you are in the world, and you have different state or national regulations, you also have to, you also have those constraints as well. So what's interesting to do, and sometimes, people ask me about that, is to have like a summary document that summarizes, the key points, so that people are not so lost, especially when we do, when the school is redoing or revising its strategy. How do you make sure that people understand what's going to be expected? Not so much, of course, of the strategy itself, of what they plan for the school, but how you're going to talk about your strategy in a couple of different areas. Depending on the accreditation, you're going to have to write a number of you're going to have to give a different lengths of details. Some accreditations will require that, you give, like if I take the French accreditation, it's maybe one page, okay? Some others you'll have to write 15 pages, and then you'll have to give the whole plan about, up to the, KPIs. And so people have to know exactly how you're going to use it. Otherwise, it's going to be, difficult to be able to use that in your documentation. So, know your audience, but also I think what's key is, explain to your school what that audience is, what the various audiences is, and do that, to the top management, because they are usually the ones that are giving the directions into different things happening at the school. So also, make sure that top management knows the different expectations of the different audiences. You know, those of you that have done or are in the process of EFMD accredited, which is more, you know, program accreditation, well, of course, you have to, you know, if you have a specific program there, then again, you have to read, as Mélanie said, you know, read the guidelines and, you know, what they expect to know from the program. Because of course they'll ask, you know, where the program is in the portfolio of the school, but they'll want to know about the program in depth. So, you know, EFMD accredited is more about design objectives, you know, and they also have, you know, transversal standards, which is, you know, similar to the one for EQUIS. Mélanie, I don't know if you want, I thought you wanted to add something to that, but I may be wrong.
I think it was just an echo of something.
Oh, okay. And same thing with AMBA, right? AMBA is, you know, more program focused, unless, you know, we go to BGA, but we'll talk about BGA afterwards. And again, AMBA, you know, you have to talk about strategy again. Well, what do they want to know about your school context, your school strategy? They want to know more about your portfolio of programs. You know, that's what's, you know, more of their interest. How do you have, you know, if you are accrediting your portfolio of MBAs, you know, how are those, you know, in the overall portfolio of programs? You know, what do they mean for the strategy of the school? And then, you know, they focus really on design, curriculum and assessment, impact as well, and of course also sustainability. But once again, you know, you are the same school with the same programs, and it's, you know, very different, a different approach. You know, yet again. So you have to also adapt to that and tell your story in a different way again. So I think really knowing the audience, but I link to that also having a reliable source of data that goes from your strategy to the portfolio of programs to, you know, ratios and things like that. So, you know, having that, I don't want to say like a raw resource, but having like a baseline of all of those aspects that you can then use in different contexts. It's really important to have the high level, because, you know, if you have the high level, then you can use it in different contexts. If you have something that's too contextualized and that, you know, is very specific, is very, you know, it's just targeted toward one audience, it's going to be very difficult to transfer that and recycle that information to use for different accreditations. So I think there are comments. I don't know if you want to address them. I keep seeing them pop up and I'm sorry because sometimes I see the comment and my brain automatically goes to the comment. So yeah, so I think one of the points was about the cultural context of accreditation. It's definitely not easy, you know, with the different contexts. So that's really really important. And yeah, having open questions with staff liaison, that's true, also helps a lot. So it's because there is also sometimes what I have found as well is that the expectations also change, you know, in a very subtle ways. You know, what they, like, let's say what you know, I mentor 2 schools for AACSB. And, you know, sometimes, you know, you tell your schools, well, you know, do this and do that. But I also always check with the liaison, because sometimes there might be things that are happening internally with AACSB that are going to impact what's expected of the schools. And you know, I need to be also on top of that. So checking with the liaison is also a good, when you can, is also a good point.
So as expected, there is a comment question about the recent changes AACSB made about diversity and inclusion. I think, honestly, it doesn't fundamentally change much. Because what they replaced, so yes, they did replace it with community and connectedness. I think the main idea was that already. The whole point is to be now politically correct in a way that suits the government, the American government, and it doesn't really change the main idea, like the root of the idea. I think the government is trying to avoid too many woke movements in schools, and I think that's not the purpose of the schools. So I'm not sure that's really an impact, except for those who created DEI departments or someone in the head of DEI. That might be a little different, and maybe they need to adapt or refocus, because originally in a lot of schools, these were people who were just dealing with people with disabilities, for example. That was the part about inclusion, was mostly about disability in a lot of schools. So then they kind of transformed that to make it something bigger. And I think it's somewhat specific to the US to address all those issues about racial background. So social background, I guess, is everywhere. But minorities is a very strong focus in the United States. So I think these need to remain and be expressed in a way that relates very strongly, I think, to community and connectedness. I think the whole part about gender, which was the big thing, and I think is the starting point of all this, it could maybe this could be dialed down if it was something very big in some of the schools and universities, but it doesn't mean that you stop doing things to include people that are somewhat different from the norm, but maybe you don't broadcast it. I think that's the main thing. So I honestly think it doesn't really change that many things as far as AACSB accreditation is concerned. What's your thought, Isabelle?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it changes that much. I don't know if any of you attended what they called the AACSB town hall on Wednesday, where they explained, how they went about it and so on. I think their main concern really was to make sure that schools that were not as free in a way to have those initiatives as strong as before could still, continue with AACSB accreditation. So they revised the language accordingly. And then what they explained for Standard 9 was that instead of being prescriptive about saying, well, use SDGs, use this, use that, and this is, how you need to report, then they are having the schools, the school has now the freedom in a way to define what having societal impact means for them in their own context. I think that's probably the main difference, that you'll have to define for you as a school, what does it mean, and how do you address that?
I think it was an issue even before the whole Trump thing. Yeah. Especially with maybe Middle Eastern countries or very far East countries, where the term or the concept of freedom or inclusion or equity or whatever is different from that of Western countries. So I think there was an issue before, because obviously you cannot expect the same level of inclusion in all parts of the world, even if we hope for. There's a reality. So your context, your geographical context is very important, and you need to explain that. And also, I think, well, you said that, and it was also referred to in the comments, but it's really important to say why you are the way you are as a school, because it can be determined by your political, geographical, or historical context. And to you, it's obvious. I mean, you know why you're like that, but to people coming from other countries, it might be very difficult to understand. So you have to really spell it out. And I think it's really important in all the accreditations that we're talking about right now. It applies to all of them, really.
Yeah. And I think in a way, I mean, if I take the example of KEDGE, one of the big things for us has always been, the focus on CSR, and we even have, we host study test as well, in KEDGE, and so it's always been a big part of our identity, and it's not going to change because the standards are changing. I think that's one of the great things about, it being mission driven in many ways. You are who you are. And as long as you walk the talk, and that's leading me to, to maybe the second point that we kind of wanted to address, because once you know your audience, well, the second part that's really important, and we identified three points when we were discussing this session with Mélanie. The second part is, well, how do you walk the talk? So you know your audience, you know who you are as a school, and I see, and I've experienced, one of the maybe sometimes more difficult things to do is to say, well, this is our strategy, this is our mission, but then how do you explain, how do you walk that talk? Okay, how what you do is coherent with who you say you are. Is your portfolio of programs aligned with your mission? If you say that you are, focused on sustainability, well, is sustainability included in your courses? Do you measure that in your assurance of learning? So the coherence and alignment between your mission and your action is also very important. And I would say this is maybe the one thing they have in common, like it's very important, who you are, and they are going to look for coherence. And, for instance, and, we talk a lot about that, internally, and also I speak about that, with colleagues at conferences. One of the things when they come for the visits is they really want to know, well, what is what they said in the report, really what's happening. So that's one part. But before you get to that is when you write the report, is your report coherent? Is what you are presenting coherent? So let's say you have you present this, picture perfect of a mission, a vision, and then, they look at your portfolio of programs and it's all over the place. Well, they are going to wonder what's the coherence, with that. Or you have research. Yes, you have research, but you don't have centers of excellence, or you don't have research centers on the specific topics that, a lot of faculty, research. Yeah, exactly. And so, how do you, like, if you say you are, towards sustainability, but you have no research centers on sustainability, well, how do you explain that, sustainability is a big, area for you? So things like that, really, and also in faculty recruitment, who do you hire? Who do you need to hire? Is it aligned with the needs of your programs? Is that going to answer the school's mission, and so on and so forth? And same thing with impact. Is what you're doing, aligned with what the type of impact that you want to have as a school, on society, on the community.
I would like us to pause on the faculty subject, because I think it's one of the subjects that are difficult to deal with when you're dealing with several accreditations, because they are not counted the same way. Yeah. Qualification is different according to different accreditations. So who wants to know what, basically?
So if well, you know or may know that AACSB is the more quantitative and the more specific about what they want for qualifications. So AACSB has, well, 4 main categories. If you add the additional, if you have a fifth, basically it's the ones that are not qualified. But you have, faculty that are scholarly academics. You have, faculty that's, academics, but have more practice orientation. And same thing, you can have, purely practitioners, and then you can have practitioners that want to go more towards academia. So basically, you have 4 different categories with AACSB, and you categorize all of your, permanent faculty and all of your non-permanent faculty.
And that's important to say, because
that's very important.
AACSB is the only one really. EFMD does it for the holding a doctorate or a PhD, but I think AACSB is the one where it's more allowed to consider your adjunct faculty, part-timers, whatever. If they have the right qualifications, then it's counted in the qualification ratios. So, and this is very important, because usually when schools are in one set mode about, dealing with their full-time faculty, that's only what they're looking at. And you can tell by the way it's how hard it's difficult to get the data back for adjunct faculty, that it's a part of the faculty that is not well supervised.
So that's very difficult, and depending again on where you are in the world, and if you are in France or in some countries in Europe, you rely heavily on adjunct faculty. And it used to be like, I've remembered like 15 years ago or so, when I started in accreditations, and we had an American chair for our visit. The key thing was you have so many adjuncts, and it was her first visit in a non-US school, and it was an area where we had to justify a lot, because in the US, I did my PhD in the US, and I remember there were very few adjunct faculty. Most of the faculty were permanent faculty members. So that's a very different context. So, and in France, as you said, Mélanie, that's one area that's very difficult to get data on, because you have to find ways to make them give you, updated data every year on their, CVs and what activities and so on, so that you yourself as a school can qualify them.
And they're usually not managed by the same people. So that makes it even harder
as well. So that's, that makes it hard. And, depending on your school, you can have, 50, 100, a couple of hundred, adjunct faculty. So that's, that's a key point. Being able to qualify them is really key. Making sure that when people hire adjuncts, they know what's expected from accreditations. But it's also, how do people maintain qualifications? Because sometimes you have a good adjunct faculty member, and the person's going to work for 5-10 years, or, they start at the school, they are qualified, then you go for the next round of accreditation, and it might, like with now AACSB, for instance, 6 years. In the 6 years' time, they can use, they can use the sorry, I keep seeing the comments, so my brain just
we'll get back to it.
Yeah, that's okay. So so they, in 6 years people can lose qualifications, so it's very important to stay on top of that as well. And depending on the type of programs that you have, you might have a little bit of leeway with this. And depending on whether you're in initial and, renewal, and the type of programs. But basically, AACSB is the one that has the, I would say, the more detailed,
To get back to Natalie's comment in the conversation, who says AACSB is also very open to discussing how and which faculty to include in Standard 3, working with them because they have a dual education across business and practical arts, and they include faculty which are intended to be in line with the standards. And that's true. And sometimes also one key point as far as AACSB is concerned are the disciplines.
Yeah.
You might want to give that the right amount of thought because according to what your disciplines are, if you have programs in this discipline or if you have majors in the discipline, then obviously there are ratio expectations. So be careful how you define them. Do not be too granular, but also don't put everything in one big package because it won't work either. And actually, it will not help you at all. So you have to think about that also. I think when you start in accreditations, because when I go to conferences and talk to people who are, thinking about entering an accreditation process, they were thinking, a lot of them think, okay, we'll start with that one, whatever that one is. Usually EFMD program or AACSB or AMBA, they keep EQUIS for the last part. But what I usually tell them is you need to think now about the other accreditations that you will want to get into, because once you get settled for that first accreditation, you will soon realize that the parameters are different from the other accreditation that you want to go after. So as part of your whole accreditation strategy, and I think I'm stepping into the third aspect, but I see that time is kind of flying. So you really need to think about your overall accreditation strategy. Do not look one accreditation at a time because you will lose so much time, so much money on this. Try and have a global view. Align, I mean, when I say align, it's not between them, but like have a look at each standards facing each other, saying, okay, ACSB wants essay for that in disciplines. All right, let's see what my disciplines look like. But also we can take the adjunct faculty, so that's a big plus. However, for maybe EFMD program, my core faculty is more important. So what does it look like? And it's institutional and programmatic. So you have to see all the requirements and then paint a whole picture of what your overall faculty should look like to fit all the standards, really.
Yeah,
with
exactly.
That view about maintaining also, processes and everything.
Yeah, and if I go back to the example of faculty, and if you think, let's say, well, you start with AACSB, okay, and you say, okay, so I can have adjuncts and, they count as long as they are qualified there, my ratios are good. Well, then you want to think about, you want to go for EQUIS. EQUIS is, core faculty ratio, so it's core faculty student ratio. Well, that means that you can't have, a huge number of adjuncts and you don't have enough core faculty to teach in your programs. So, I think you're very right when you say, have a global strategy, about accreditation, because, and I may just add into it because, I know, schools are also looking into that, but rankings, right? Because the faculty will also have an impact in, the rankings and so on. So you have to really think at the higher level and think with the people that, are also deciding people in your organization and your schools about, really thinking about that for hiring strategy, program strategy, and so on. And, you know, another example that maybe we can take, Mélanie, is assurance of learning. Because assurance of learning, and again, I like to take the example of AACSB and AOL, because, you know, AACSB, you have to define, you know, your competency goals, and you go all the way through the measurement and, you know, what they call closing the loop, which is you review a full cycle of 3 years, and then you review what, you know, what changes need to be made in the program, or, you know, what needs to be addressed, and so on. Well, you have to think, if you do AACSB first, you know, think also about what you need maybe at your national level. I know, you know, with the team at KEDGE, we went through those discussions about, you know, really thinking, well, we have the French, you know, national, you know, competencies and expectations, and how do we make sure that we have a more global approach to assurance of learning. And so the team has been working, you know, thinking along those lines to make sure that we were not, for every accreditation, whether it's French or, you know, international, that we were not reinventing the wheel and redoing the work every time. And how do you make sure that what you do for AACSB can also fit, you know, for EFMD and for, you know, AMBA as well. So
Yes.
that's, I think, you know, that one on assurance of learning, you know, is really, really essential. And I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier about try in as many cases as you can to have like a base set of information, of data that you can use and contextualize, and that you can recycle. Because what you want to do is that you want to avoid accreditation fatigue. Because if you have to reinvent the wheel and rewrite and rethink, you know, every time you're doing something different, it's very complicated. So I think, you know, having that global approach is really key. And having it at a higher level in the organization also is key.
We have a question, 2 questions in the comments. So Oliver is saying UK business schools are increasingly exploring opportunities in the TNE, so transnational education, I think. Branch campuses, franchise arrangements, dual joint degrees, etc. To what extent do these models introduce new challenges or risks in meeting AACSB Standard 3 and EQUIS Chapter 4 regarding faculty sufficiency and development? And that's a big one.
Yeah, that's a big one. So I think one of the things, so again, here you have to really know what the rules or the guidelines are on this, on the different accreditations, because you'll want to make sure that the type of agreement that you are going to, you know, get into with a different, you know, with a partner schools is going to meet, is going to be easy to explain in a way, maybe. Like I take the example, right? You want to do a double degree. Well, think about the school that you want to partner with. Think about how you are going to need to report this in the reports. And think also that if you do like a dual degree, and let's say one school, it's 1 degree from every, you know, 2 degrees from 2 schools. Well, that's that degree, because it's a, you know, it's a granting degree program that you're having a dual degree with. You will have to report that in your accreditation, especially AACSB for the ratios and so on. So you have to think about that, how easy it's going to be. Do you want to be with an accredited school and then they use their own definitions? If you're not with an accredited school, how are you ensuring that you maintain quality and so on? So that's a big one. I have to say, you really have to think about the type of arrangement.
Yes, and you have to be very specific while, you know, drafting the contract, the partnership agreements, because I was actually earlier this morning in a discussion with a school about this, about dual agreements. And when I said that they should start asking also, you know, for faculty CVs and see for non-accredited schools, especially because, you know, and also see program syllabus, curriculum, and you know, all types of information that can help you decide if the competencies or learning objectives are met in their part of the program. And I saw the phrase like drop, you know, like, oh no, but she said, but I don't picture myself asking that from my partner. And I said, okay, well, that school is in the initial accreditation process, so it's not yet an issue. And also they only have like 2 students going to these dual degrees, so it's not really an issue. But I said that coming from now on, when they draft and they have new agreements, that they really should write it, that they need to have that information updated every year, so that they know what's happening in the other school for that part of the program and teaching. So.
Yeah, and I think also it's always a good idea sometimes if you are, because sometimes we can get very creative, international, you know, ideas, and I think it's always a good idea if you are not sure exactly to talk with the liaison or to talk with someone at the given accreditation, you know, whether it's AMBA, whether it's, you know, AACSB, EQUES. I've always done that. Like when I'm not sure about something, I will reach out and say, well, you know, we're thinking about doing this. It would kind of look that way. Is it okay? Would you need to see? So what would you need to know from us? So it's really important. And I would also say, try to have the person internally who's handling this to, you know, write with them, ask them to write it down. Because you know how sometimes people are in meeting, they say, oh, we're going to do this. This is such a great idea. We're going to do this that way. They are a great school, blah, blah, blah. Then, you know, it's like when you have to write something, you get, you know, to your computer and you want to start typing about that particular, you know, arrangement or, you know, relationship with the school. And you're like, oh, okay, so I need this information, I need this, I'm liking this, I don't have this, and so on. So putting it on paper and having a document between, you know, different offices at the school always helps. And asking the tough questions, you know, to, you know, to the people that are handling the topic.
But so I'm receiving a comment, not in the conversation, but
yeah.
on WhatsApp, I won't say who, saying that because of that, some really good opportunities to work with partners are kind of thrown down the toilet, because if they don't meet those standards, then, you know, the school can be reluctant to make it happen. So it's when you're thinking about developing something, maybe it could be something with a subject that's really not business related, you know, in which case it doesn't apply that much, because AACSB you know, counts the business related disciplines and qualification and business related programs. So it could be a way to kind of avoid that. I don't know, but it's a lot of missed opportunities, I think, to impose that, to have that kind of control about what the partner is offering in terms of faculty qualifications and assurance of learning, or whatever it's called according to accreditations.
Yeah, I have to say for this, if you are in initial, you know, stages, it can be tricky because you have a history of partnerships that you now need to, you know, talk about in your reports. How do you handle that? But I think, you know, the question, and that's where, you know, accreditations can be structuring on many levels in, you know, in a school is, you know, well, what's your strategy in terms of international partnerships or even national partnerships? You know, what's the strategy behind it? Is your partner strategy, you know, aligned with your school's mission? If it is, you know, how do you assess quality? And I would say, I don't want to say all of the schools, but all of the schools, at least that I know and that I've been part of, you know, has always had to rethink, you know, that strategy. To make sure that we were still aligned and what it meant for you. It doesn't mean that you cannot partner with a non-accredited school, but it means that if you do so, you have to be, you know, reporting on how you assess the quality and why it makes sense to have that partnership. You know, if we think back a couple of years ago, in Italy, there were barely any schools that were accredited, you know, and nowadays there are more, but, you know, we still had partnerships, you know, with schools in Italy. Well, how did we, you know, explain that quality? Well, we had different criteria, you know, that answered that. So I think it's, you know, you will have to rethink your processes, that's for sure.
There is a question by Xenia asking if we have good examples of matching AOL and ILOs. Not to forget, in case of French schools, RNCP competencies imposed by local educational system, which is a big one also. Curriculum mapping becomes a nightmare when you try to overlap all these approaches and requirements. So I think there's no easy answer because it takes time. I'm actually working with 2 schools currently on that very subject about aligning the whole quality assurance processes as far as AOL is concerned and trying to match the processes so that, as Isabelle was saying earlier, you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time.
Yeah.
Or if you're starting a new accreditation, like I was saying, you need to anticipate that at some point, even though you're starting AACSB now and will focus on AOL, if you're going after a EFMD program or if you're going after an EQUIS system, then you will need to rethink your whole thing. So try to anticipate all the accreditations that you think about going to go after in the upcoming 5 years, I would say, and then start working on what you want. So on the program level, because that's always how it happens, you need to, I think the ACSB's approach deriving from the mission is a good start.
Yeah.
What are the key attributes our graduates need to have? Okay, once you've identified that, can I break it down into more professional attributes, concrete things? Because when you have critical thinking, it's not concrete, you know, it's like a transversal competency that you have. But maybe analyzing data and writing a report, synthesis of that data is a very specific, more technical skills that relates more to what Xenia is saying about RNCP, which is very job focused in France. And I know I've worked with schools from many different countries. I'm not going to say many, but different countries. And some of them have very large national systems. And so sometimes if you have those very intricate systems with very detailed objectives that you need to measure all the time, it will help you because then you have all you need. You just don't need to take it all. Just take what's necessary for that accreditation. Because I've seen schools who wanted to put everything, like, I don't know, 100 points of measure across programs. No, don't do that. And ACSB was saying, no, we don't need to know all that. So just, again, understand what's expected, how much is expected, but then you can find a way to align those systems. And I think that as far as EFMD program is concerned, the ILOs kind of resemble LNCP competencies more than what AACSB requires. So I think AACSB has the larger picture, and then you can, when you have your process about closing the loop that you were mentioning, Isabelle, I think it's you can apply it to various degrees of your quality process, really. You just need to have one process and then see what you measure and can it feed different accreditations. It's not easy to answer like that, but like I said, I'm working with schools on that very topic. It takes us a while.
Yeah, it does take a while. I can see that I have in the audience Marie-Laure Bernetex is in the audience from KEDGE, and also Elisabeth Gourbière, and you know, Marie-Laure, what she did in, you know, in the work at the school, you know, with a group of people, but we went back from you know, the mission of the school, and exactly as you said, you know, that's our mission. You know, we have, you know, free access. And from those access, you know, what kind of core competencies, you know, can we derive from that? And then, you know, we kind of drill down to show, well, if, you know, those competencies, you know, how do they match RNCP, you know, more professional competencies, and how do they match with assurance of learning? So it took a long time. It's very time consuming. And again, it's going back to the global picture. You know, I mean, it's great now because, you know, things are aligned and it's a nice story to tell in the reports, but you have to be aware it's going to take you quite some time to do that, because you have to get a couple of different people on board, and then you have to really think at the global picture and all the different steps. So
we're only 5 minutes away from the end of the webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to write them or raise your hand and you can just speak it. I would say that to summarize what we've been saying, the key takeaways, I think, if you agree, Isabelle, is strategy. Have an accreditation strategy. Know what if you're beginning into the international accreditation system, then know what you will want to do within 3 or 5 years, so that you do not format yourself according to one accreditation and then rediscover that, oh my God, we've changed so many things in our school to fit that accreditation, and now we have to do it again for that other one. So just think about your accreditation strategy, and then same thing, take a step back or higher when it comes to all these AOL competencies questions, so that you can see how you can align all things. So it's a complicated process. I'm not self-serving here, but this is typically the thing that we help schools with. So reach out. But yeah, if any other key takeaway you want to focus on, Isabelle?
No, I think you said it. You know, we also, when we were doing the thinking about this session, you know, like having 3 takeaways that we wanted to really share. And I think those are, you know, three takeaways really that I've applied, you know, over the years working in accreditation, and that have been extremely helpful. So so I hope you find those helpful as well. And you know, feel free to reach out or, you know, come up at conferences and so on.
Yeah, I was going to focus on that. The network is very important in understanding what it's about. Isabelle and I were actually discussing this the other day about how the French network of there was still is an accreditation work group where all people working accreditations get together and talk about various subjects, and you learn so much from your peers. So feel free to to connect. If you don't have a national system like we have in France, maybe you could be the one school to start it, you know, in your country, to make a group of accreditation professionals and attend conferences and seminars, because you learn so much. So yes, definitely an ICAM for both of us. Last quick technical question. Do you report your external instructors at Albanexter as a joint faculty for EQUIS? I guess it depends on the number of hours they actually teach.
Yeah.
Same as AACSB, really.
Yes,
for AACSB,
right. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Always wondering on that, you know.
Some schools say between below 15 hours, I mean, they're not counted anywhere. For some, maybe it's even below 30 hours. So what makes sense for you?
Depends on the number of hours, right? Depending on the schools. Yeah, because we know in the French context, we have like 400 external instructors a year. So it's quite difficult to report on them and know who counts, you know. Yeah.
You just have to set a rule about a number of hours that makes sense according to
the structure. And then we just say to EQUIS, this is the rule we applied, and that's it. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, thank you so much. I wanted to introduce next month's session, but it's one dedicated to more Middle Eastern countries, because accreditations are growing over there. So we're having a focus session for that public, but feel free to join if you're curious about national, because I know that some schools want to open campuses in the Middle East, so it could be interesting also. So thank you very much for attending. Isabelle, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you everyone. Great questions, great discussion.
Yes, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. We'll see if you can answer them with pleasure. See you soon. See you in ICAM for those who will attend. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.